Sarah Walker with you this afternoon. Bill Buckley on the way from 1. Now, we often meet mums who write about their experience of parenting in the form of online blogs, which seem to have soared in popularity in the last 5 or 6 years. We very rarely talk to dads who do that, but a father of 3 from Thatcham is kind of bucking that trend with his online parenting blog. His name's Tim Liu. He joins me in the studio now. So how long have you been blogging for? Because, as I said, this is the whole parenting blogging thing seems to have risen in popularity in the last 5 years or so. Did you start back then or earlier, or did you come to it later?
Yeah, actually a bit earlier than that.
Okay.
So I started blogging back in 2007,
Yeah.
and at various times since then I've had a total of 7 different blogs, but I've been focusing on the parenting side for the last 3 or 4 years.
Now, I mentioned that you've got 3 children. How old are they?
They're 8 and 6
Yeah.
and 4. So the two oldest are boys and the youngest is a girl.
Okay, so when you first came to blogging, you had, what, a 1-year-old, or he was in his infancy, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
that's right. I'd started just a few months after Isaac was born.
Okay.
And it's kind of snowballed from there.
Now, why did you start it?
Well, it's one of those things, I think. I've never had any kind of formal training as a
Yep.
writer or a journalist or anything like that, but I've had this kind of itch, this urge to write ever since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And normally I am the shyest, quietest, most introverted person in any room. You know, I'm the person who wouldn't say boo to the proverbial goose.
Yeah.
But I'm much more comfortable writing than talking, and the blog's given me a voice, which
Yeah.
it helps me process my own thinking, and it allows me to share the ups and downs of being a dad and capture all those little moments of having a growing family that otherwise just whiz by in a flash, don't they?
It's such a good point, that whole thing about it helps you to process your own thinking. It does. It helps you to make sense of the constant ups and downs of being a parent,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so often parenting makes very little sense at the time.
Exactly. And you almost always feel as though you're doing it wrong as well. It's somehow every day you're making another parenting blunder, really.
Absolutely. And one of the great things about blogs is you're part of this wider community
Yeah.
where you're sharing your stories, they're sharing their stories, and actually you realise that you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're all in the same boat. Everyone's struggling. Nobody has this perfect image or this perfect life that sometimes you see portrayed on social media, and the reality, as we know, is completely different.
Of course it is. And why focus on parenting, though, as the subject matter for your blog?
I think with 3 kids, they provide a lot of material anyway.
Yeah, that's not,
and it's an opportunity for me, as I said, to process my thoughts, but also it allows me to capture all those little moments.
Yeah.
I guess it's a little bit like keeping a diary.
Yeah.
But it's you're writing about them, you're capturing photos about them. You're having people that comment on them as well. So, it's a great way of capturing those early years of life that do go by in a blur.
Yeah, and it's interesting because certainly in the last few years, we've seen a rise in parenting blogs that are, it's difficult to describe it, but, uber realistic. And I'm thinking about, in particular, one of the most famous bloggers to do this is the Unmumsy Mum, who she's now written a book, and actually her style is very much to not hide the realities of parenting. So very much she was one of the forerunners in saying, do you know what, parenting is very, very difficult. Some days you can sort of walk away from it thinking, why on earth did I ever decide to have children? Not every day is great. I absolutely love my children. I absolutely adore them. But, I'm going to stand up and say, sometimes it's absolute hell. And if you feel like that, you're not alone. You've not quite gone down that road. I don't think you're quite realistic in the realities, but you're sort of with the middle ground. But there has been that rise in the uber realistic, hasn't there?
Absolutely. And as you say, I tend to focus more on the positives of parenting.
Yeah.
I do acknowledge the fact that things aren't perfect, but that's not what I choose to focus on. I'm trying to focus on the positive things, the things that make me happy, the things that I want to look back on in later life. But you talk about Sarah, and she's a great example, and she has, I think it's something like 450,000 followers on Facebook now because the stories she tells and are very, very real, and people share that with her. And I've met Sarah. I've had the fortune to meet Sarah a couple of times, and she's become quite a good friend. I've interviewed her I've interviewed her on the podcast that I do as well.
Yeah, I think as well that quite a lot of what she writes is very funny. It's very entertaining, simply because it's so, the opposite of what we usually read about on parenting blogs and that kind of thing. But the serious side to it is that she has helped a lot of people who may have found themselves struggling as a new parent. It is very difficult when you have young children. You do feel as though you're doing something wrong all of the time. You do question why you're not enjoying every second of every day. And certainly in her book, she acknowledges the number of people who've come forward and said to her, actually, thanks for saying this. Thanks for being that voice. When I, otherwise I would have felt as though I was getting nowhere and not really achieving much as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of Sarah's, I guess, the ethos behind her blog is that it's okay to fail occasionally.
Yeah.
And if you have more wins than losses, then you're doing okay.
Yeah. Coming up, we'll talk about the sort of reaction that you get to your blogs, because that is certainly something that would put me off writing a blog, I think, because whilst you must get a lot of positive reaction, sometimes there must be negative reaction in there as well. And we'll talk about how you deal with that. So more from Tim to come after The Cause. BBC Radio Berkshire playing The Cause and Dreams, 17 minutes past midday. Sarah Walker with you this afternoon. Tim Liu is my guest for this hour. He's from Thatcham. He's a father of 3. And he is bucking the blogging trend, certainly the parenting blogging trend, which over the last 5 years has soared in popularity. And mostly the parenting bloggers we tend to find are women. But you decided to start blogging on the subject of parenting 7 years ago when the eldest of your 3 children was not yet 1 even. Give us a rough insight into the sorts of things then that you blog about.
Okay, so Slouching Towards Thatcham is primarily a blog about fatherhood and my experiences as a dad. So, I do share a lot of my experiences with the kids who, as I said, they provide a lot of material.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also write about things that related to my wider life. So, there's only so many times that you can write about the boys' obsession with the London Underground or with Minecraft. So I'll also comment on real world issues. So recently wrote some posts about the EU referendum.
Okay.
I'm a second generation immigrant, so some of the fallout from the Leave votes, obviously concerns me a great deal, particularly the impact that it might have on my kids. So I wrote a lot about that, but I write about all kinds of things. I guess my speciality is writing and singing parodies of well-known songs. So
yeah, now I have seen glimpses of this. So there's a parody of Bohemian Rhapsody doing the rounds from you, isn't there?
There is, yeah. That was my very first one last year, and some of my other efforts include a version of the 1980s soundtrack song Pretty in Pink, which was actually a piece of social commentary that I wrote about people's reaction to my eldest son's love of Pink when he was in preschool, so when he was age 3 or 4, and actually at the Brit Mums BML parent blogging conference a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to deliver one of the keynotes, and that's what I performed live in front of 500 people. So that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. But
wow.
I think it's probably safe to say that Simon Cowell won't be calling me anytime soon.
This is all quite at odds with the fact that you say, you are the wallflower. You walk into a room and you are not going to be the life and soul of the party, and there you are standing up in front of all of these people. And I suppose it's through blogging that's given you, well, obviously that's the reason that you were there, but it's empowered you, I suppose, to be able to do that, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think it's opened up a lot of opportunities, and something like this comes along, it doesn't come along all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm very much of the mindset that when something like this comes along, you take that opportunity.
Yeah.
I was absolutely terrified beforehand, I have to admit, but it has opened up opportunities, such as this, opportunities to work with sometimes with brands and sponsors and so on, and just generally having access to experiences that otherwise I might not have without the blog.
I think the idea of blogging appeals to a lot of people. It's kind of become the new version of I'd like to write a book, but simpler and easier, and everyone can do it, really. Yeah. Everyone can start a blog if they want to. The problem is keeping it up, and the problem is doing it, particularly if you want to do it to reach a wider audience, trying to get that wider audience is quite difficult to sustain. And I suppose the key to it is by constantly updating it, constantly writing new articles. That's the only way that you're going to keep the momentum going. So how often do you write a new post?
So I will write a post maybe 3 or 4 times a week.
Okay.
And it can be difficult to keep it going. I think, there's an initial flush of enthusiasm when you start a blog. And a lot of people do fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
But often, actually, certainly what I've found is it's all the extra benefits that you don't necessarily realise when you start the blog. It's the sense of community, it's making new friends, it's getting in touch with other people, it's having some of those additional experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have, that both encourage you to keep going and actually give you the additional material.
Does it sometimes feel, though, like you sort of sit down at night after you've had your tea, you're in that kind of post-tea slump in front of EastEnders and you're thinking, oh, I really can't be bothered to write a post tonight? Or have you sustained that momentum so you don't feel like that?
It happens. I think it happens to every blogger at some point in their writing. And I think you just learn to manage the peaks and troughs. So when I'm on a roll, I will write 3-4 posts in one go and have them all ready to go. And then at times I will take a few days off because the ideas have dried up, or actually I just need a break.
Yeah, of course.
And you learn to work that into your schedule, because I'm trying to fit blogging around a full-time job as well, and taking care of the kids and trying to spend enough time with them rather than just writing about them.
Yeah.
So you learn to kind of fit blogging in almost wherever you can in those little pockets of time that you have.
Now, you say that that sense of community is really appealing. You know, the fact that people engage with you about the blog posts, and you start to have a conversation with a national or global audience, I suppose. Do you ever get negative comments? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
You do occasionally. I think one of the things about the parent blogging community is that mostly the people who do respond to you do tend to be positive.
Yes.
But you do get disagreements sometimes. You get someone that disagrees with perhaps a certain way that you've disciplined your child, or the whole breast versus bottle debate, which goes on largely amongst mums. So as a dad, happily I can take a step back from that.
Yeah.
But I think you deal with negative comments the same way you do with positive comments. I think people are entitled to their own views.
It's quite difficult though online, isn't it? Because people can be much nastier than they might be face to face, because they can hide behind a computer screen.
Yeah. And I as a rule I tend to allow any comments on the blog. If there's any profanity, or if things start getting rude, then I will edit, or I will moderate accordingly. But on the whole, I'm quite happy to engage people who have different opinions. But I think as long as the commentary and the discussion is civil, a disagreement is a disagreement. I've disagreed with many of my friends online who've commented on my posts, or when I've commented on theirs, and that's kind of okay. But as you say, online there is a danger of the discourse becoming quite negative sometimes.
Exactly. What makes a good blog, as far as you're concerned?
Above all, I think the content has to be relevant and engaging.
Yeah.
There is an element where I do write for myself, and I am my primary audience. But if you want to build an audience that goes beyond immediate family and friends, and gives you a wider presence in the world, then it has to be content it has to be engaging. It has to be a little bit different. There are so many hundreds and thousands of parenting blogs out there, particularly written by mums, that it's really hard to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah. I suppose that there's that sort of sense of needing an authentic voice as well. It has to be the real you, doesn't it, when you're writing? Because I think it's probably unsustainable if it's not. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's really important to have that authentic voice, as you say. If you don't, I think it is very hard to sustain a voice that isn't truly yours.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think sometimes it's very easy to unconsciously try to imitate another blogger who you really admire and try to adopt their voice. Whereas really, as a writer, you should be focusing on your own voice, because nobody can write about yourself as well as you can.
Yeah, exactly. Your youngest is going to start school in September. How are you feeling about that looming phase of having no more preschoolers in the house?
It's a real milestone moment, isn't it?
Isn't it just?
Yeah, so it's the third time we'll have been through this, and there's one part of us that's mourning the kind of the loss of early childhood, as it were.
Years, yeah.
But equally, at the same time, I have to admit that we're celebrating the fact that we only have to do one set of drop-offs and one set of pickups going forward.
At least for a few years, until the eldest goes to secondary school, and then goodness only knows.
Yeah. And then it starts all over again.
Yeah, you're all over the place. Really lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming in to see us. If anyone wants to check out the blog, where can they find it? What's it called?
It's called Slouching Towards Thatcham, and you can find it at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com.
Lovely stuff. Tim, thank you, as I said, for coming in and seeing us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
On BBC Radio Berkshire. Coming up then, the very latest Travel You Trust, also the latest sport news.